And now, just for you, YK World.
Welcome to YK World, a podcast about the goop between music, art, and technology, told through the lens of YK Records and the Nashville music scene. That's what we're saying for now. We'll see how it comes together as things progress. Thank you all so much for listening to the inaugural debut episode. I have no idea how many of you listened to it, but I did receive some great email and some DMs and some just generally good feedback about it. So I know that there are people listening. I even heard from Justin Meyer that I used to work with at Sponge Bath. Hell of a great blast from the past, and looking forward to connecting with him more. Anyone that reached out, everyone that reached out, thank you. An episode all about me was an awkward transmission, but I think it worked out okay. So here we are at episode 2, and I gotta admit, I'm kind of fearing the sophomore slump. This might not be the right direction to go in, but I'm gonna try and embrace sharing some practical advice in this episode. This show is ostensibly through the lens of YK Records, so why not take a deep dive into that and provide some insights about actually releasing a record. If you are not a musician or you are not someone running a label, I still think this will be informative and entertaining. That is my goal. You'll have to listen and then DM me to let me know if I succeeded or failed. Maybe a little bit of both. Little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. All right, so let's take a little journey through the process of releasing records. I'm going to try and split this up into easy-to-consume sections. Feel free to gorge or nibble, but I'm going to make it all go down easy. So far, releases from YK have been a little light in 2025. We have put out 2 compilations from The Robe and 1 brand new song from General Trust. Both are great, and obviously, I recommend you put them into your immediate rotation. I plan on having both of those 2 on the show one day to talk about their creative processes, but for now, just go listen to that music. It's linked in the show notes. So while the release calendar has been a little light so far in 2025, that means I have been doing the thing that I want to talk about in this episode a lot. I have been planning. I have a lot planned for this year with YK Records. Loads of albums and singles and EPs and collaborations are in the queue. But I'm not going to tell you what any of those are yet because I like to have some secrets, and revealing secrets makes things more exciting. I'm not going to tell you what's on the horizon, but now is that perfect time to talk about the planning process because I am neck deep in it many times over. Now, I do not know specifically how other labels do these things, nor do I claim to have some foolproof methodology for what I'm doing. But I do think that transparency is a big key to success. For whatever reason, there is a vibe in the music industry that if you find some level of success, you can't share that success with other people. Like, if you figured out some effective methodology, you should either keep it like a secret so that you and only you can find more success, or figure out some way to monetize that insight and make people pay to figure out how to be successful. I don't feel that way. I feel like we should all share all the information we've got and try to succeed together because rising tides lift all ships. I think that phrase is actually about like participating in capitalism, which not really what we're going for here, but I'm going to take it back and I'm going to apply it to spreading and sharing information. Transparency. Let's all share information. So if you find yourself with a question or a comment or a correction or whatever throughout listening to this episode, get at me. DM me on Instagram or email me, michael@ykworld.show, records_YK. It's linked in the show notes. It's always linked in the show notes. And let's share information, you know? Much of this was learned through trial and error. I would like for you to have more trial, less error. I've read lots of suggestions. I've seen how other people operate. I'm kind of old, so I've been watching this happen for many decades now, at least 2. And I've listened to other podcasts like this one. There's another one called Other Record Labels. It is a podcast that provides a ton of great free information. They also do sell kits on how to get started with your own record label. Again, a little bit of gatekeeping there, but I've never bought the kit, and I really don't fault them for doing that because they do provide a ton of great free information in the podcast. It's actually worth a listen. Anyway, all that's a little bit of preamble. Let's begin.
Chapter 1: The Release Planner.
All right, first and foremost, I tend not to be involved with the creation of the music at all. The artists that I work with will send me demos or halfway mixed songs, but I don't really feel like it's my part to weigh in on what they are making. I'm not going to tell an artist to shorten that intro or boost the bass or whatever. That just feels inappropriate to me. I feel that way because I'm a non-musician, so I don't have the lexicon to talk the talk, but mostly I feel that way because I see my job as the label, as a promotional tool. I'm here to lift up creative efforts, not orchestrate how they are formed. There is plenty of subjectivity that comes with this process later, but at this point, the actual creation of the music, I'm not weighing in. I don't just blindly agree to release any music sent my way. I give everything an honest listen, and sometimes things do come my way that I just don't feel, and I try to politely suggest that that's not a good fit for the label, or it's just like my plate is too full and I can't take everything on. That happens quite a bit, actually. So if you've ever received a polite refusal from me, it's legitimate. Promise. Anyway, just a little caveat there here in Chapter 1. Once the music is done and mixed, that's when I start to get involved. The very first step I partake in is to put together a quote-unquote release planner. This is literally a shared Google Doc that lets me collaborate with an artist on all the things we're going to need to do. I'm going to go into detail on all of the things that are in that doc and all of the thought processes behind it. But really, the first thing is just to write down a bunch of ideas and notes. Like, go have coffee and just think about things that you'd like to do with your release and write them all down. They don't have to be in any order or have any organization. Just get the ideas out if you have them. I'm going to share a blank version of this document that I use in the show notes. I'm not charging you for it. I'm not gatekeeping any of that stuff. Just go look at it, make your own copy if you would like to, and use it, modify it, whatever. It's there for you to use. It's just a big document of placeholders for album details, band bio, band photos, album artwork, single choices, music videos, press and radio contacts, calendar planning, literally everything that I think about as I go through this process of releasing something. So that's linked in the show notes. It's a lot of mental juggling, and having a central source of truth that has all the things that you want to do is pretty great, particularly when it's shared between people. So the first two major things I think about after scribbling down all my random ideas is the format of the release and the singles for the release. That obviously only applies if it's a larger release like an EP or an album, but for the purposes of this conversation, that's what we're going to concentrate on. Whatever you decide on for those things ends up creating a big decision tree of additional choices. So it's good to be thinking about both of those early on, the formats and the singles. Honestly, I'm going to talk about all these things as if it's some linear process, one foot in front of the other. But in reality, a whole lot of these things can be happening at the same time. You can think about multiple things at once, but I can't speak about them simultaneously. So I am going to keep this linear for the podcast. All right, let's start with one of the major things, the release format. How do we want to release the album? Digital only? Vinyl pressing? Cassette? CD? Of course, that decision may be decided by your budget. The reason we tackle this first is because the formats you want to release will have a downstream effect on a lot of additional decisions as you go. Considering each of these options leads down a rabbit hole of information. So to keep this conversation moving for now, we're going to say that a digital release means putting your music on the official website, direct-to-fan services like Bandcamp or Ampwall, and streaming services like Apple Music, Spotify, Deezer, etc. In 2025, we've gotten to the point where streaming platforms are seen as the ultimate destination, as they contain the potential for reaching the widest audience. But I have been forcing myself to frame things differently. Getting people to support your digital release via a purchase is not easy. I mean, like, who has an iTunes library these days? I do, but I understand that I am an outlier. Everyone is streaming these days. I will get into this in more detail in another episode, but for me, I want to build a fan base that's willing to support those things directly. For me, that means focusing on services like Bandcamp over Spotify. Now, Bandcamp is being used as a generic term here, like Kleenex. There are multiple services like Bandcamp that we need to keep in mind and that are actually noted in that release planner. I will get into this in a later episode. I want to talk at great length about the importance of websites and Bandcamp and Ampwall and all of their ilk, but I have so much to talk about in this episode. I'm trying to keep it kind of high level, so I'm going to save it for now. So we're going to use Bandcamp generically, but it means multiple services. I don't want to get lost in the plot here. If you want to distribute your music digitally, make sure you have a Bandcamp account and get yourself a digital distributor. Many people will suggest DistroKid or TuneCore or Lander or any number of competitors. Each one of those has their benefits. Again, another episode will dive further into that, but I'm currently putting my suggestion behind 2 distributor options. CD Baby, the very old school destination, as they only charge a one-time fee for a release rather than a subscription, and DigiDi, a Danish distributor that is a nonprofit and that focuses on every user being a co-owner of the service. I'm also more than likely butchering the name of that. D-I-G-I-D-I. Digidi? Digidi? Digidi. God, I hope it's Digidi. They've been around since 2003, and they leverage The Orchard as their backend software. Now, Digidi is a subscription service, which I don't love, but I do enjoy The Orchard as distribution software. So why am I not suggesting that you use The Orchard for your distribution? Because The Orchard is an invite-only service. You cannot sign up for it. You have to be asked into their system. So barring that invitation, I suggest you use DigiDi because it is The Orchard under the hood. It is what I use. I have been invited to The Orchard through a series of very fortunate events. So I use The Orchard for my distribution. I really like it a lot. If you want to do that as well, DigiDi will provide that for you. CD Baby is $10 per release. That's good because if you want to put your music on streaming and not pay for it for the rest of your life, it will be up there. That option does exist on the other services as well, but I believe CD Baby is maybe the most affordable. That's with bare minimum options. I understand it. Of course, they're going to pile on after that. They are a capitalist corporate machine. They need to make money to stay in business, but you can do it for a little bit if that's all you have. DigiDi is about $55 per year USD, which seems like a lot if you're putting out one album. But if you're a label or if you're releasing things with your friends, it's definitely worth it. Maybe you all can chip in together and get access to that software. Okay, so that is digital. If you want to press vinyl, great. I have pressed many records with many pressing plants, and now is probably the absolute best time to make vinyl if you want to do it. During the pandemic, there was a massive uptick in vinyl production, and it actually really sucked to press a record because the wait time between submitting your job and getting your record was at least 6 months, sometimes more. That is a long time to wait for something that you're paying for. These days, likely because of that massive surge in production, there are now a whole lot more pressing plants and a lot more competition trying to win your business. This could end up being a race to the bottom for the vinyl production plants, but that's not a rabbit hole that we're going to get into today. If you want to go down that rabbit hole, I really highly suggest you click through in the show notes to find the WNXP podcast episode of Music Citizens. That's all about Piper Payne, the owner of the vinyl pressing plant Physical Music Products. It's all about the state of the vinyl pressing industry and how Piper has started a pressing plant out in Smyrna, Tennessee, and how there's probably 5 other pressing plants here in Nashville. It's kind of bonkers. Just the entire global industry. It's a very interesting episode. Okay, so without getting too pedantic about it, a typical vinyl pressing job includes payment for the actual production of the records, lacquers, metal parts, the actual pressing, all of that stuff, as well as the jackets, the sleeves, maybe a poly bag. You can pay for those things separately, but typically when I talk about vinyl production, I am considering the whole thing. Like I submit one order to one place and I get back records and I get back artwork and I get it in a sleeve of some sort, ready to mail out. The biggest question you want to ask yourself as you consider vinyl is, how many records do you think you can sell? There's often no way to easily answer that question, but there's a big price difference between pressing 1,000 records and pressing 100 records. The pressing plants are going to want you to press more records and entice you with a lower price per unit. By that, I mean pressing 100 records might cost $1,300, which means each record costs $13 to recoup your expenses. But 1,000 records, which might cost $4,000, only cost $4 per unit. But then you have 1,000 records and a debt of $4,000. My advice comes from the perspective of a small indie label. If you are listening to this and you work at Sub Pop or Merge or 30 Tigers or Warner Brothers, thank you. Thank you for listening. This is a strange thing to have someone that works at any of those places listening to this. But also, you don't need my advice about pressing records. You've got it down pat. Anyway, as a small indie, I prefer to err on the side of lower quantity and higher price per unit. This isn't like a pessimistic stance. I believe my artists can sell 100 records. I believe that they can sell 200 records. Sometimes it's even appropriate for me to press 500 records, even if it's a double LP, so technically 1,000 pieces of vinyl. But I'm also realistic that it isn't easy to sell anything in this era, particularly when you're competing against free and streaming. Doubly, I acknowledge that having a record sell out feels extremely good. It also allows you to do a second pressing, maybe with something a little different on the second run, like a different color vinyl or something. It's fun. It's fun for everyone. So here in 2025, my advice is 100 to 200 records for most artists at my scale of operation. There are exceptions, and maybe you disagree, but that's the path that I'm following. And keep in mind that a record costs about $7 to ship. You have to buy mailers, and media mail's about $5.15 per record. It's another factor to keep in mind when you're doing your budgeting. Sadly, part of being an artist sometimes is getting into Google Sheets and writing down the amount of money that you might have to spend and then dividing that amount by the number of units that you are creating and seeing what that ends up being. Really fun. Okay, in terms of where you press those records, you have a lot of options. So many that there's no way that I could possibly be some oracle of where the best pressing plant is, nor do I think there is any best pressing plant. There are tons of great options. There's two things that I like to keep in mind when I choose a pressing plant. One is the cost. You can shop your job around to multiple places. They will all do roughly the same thing, and some of them will give you very different pricing. Always good to shop around. The second thing, honestly, for me, is communication. If I email a rep at the pressing plant and I don't hear back from them for 4 days, that's not something that I want to participate in. I'm not expecting a 30-minute turnaround or an instant turnaround of any kind. Next day is fine. Maybe 2 days later is fine, but you got to get back to me in a reasonable amount of time. Maybe there's other indicators there that there's something going on if they can't get back to me in time, like they're understaffed or people were sick, whatever. You got to give people a break. But those are the two factors that I kind of weigh a lot of this on. So with that in mind, here are the two places that I'm going to recommend to you. First is a place called Physical Music Products, aka PMP. They are located in Smyrna, Tennessee. That's about 10 minutes outside of Murfreesboro, where I went to school, I mentioned in the last episode. I like it because the owner, Piper Payne, is a mastering engineer and intricately understands the entire flow of pressing a record. Also, they're located close enough to me that I can go pick up the records. I don't have to pay shipping, which is a huge bonus. In Nashville, that applies to a number of pressing plants. There's United Record Pressing. There's Nashville Record Pressing. There's a Vinyl Lounge. There's several other spots. Again, all mentioned in that WNXP episode that's linked in the show notes. But PMP, something about it, it just speaks to me. I've worked with them on multiple projects and been extremely happy with the results. The other place I'm going to recommend is a Canadian press called Precision Press. They've been running a deal lately that is $1,300 for 100 records, which includes sleeves and labels and polybags. That's an insane deal. I think they can do it because they are owned by a very large corporate entity called GZ Media. Again, That WNXP episode kind of gets into all this. I don't know how I should feel about this. GZ Media owns a lot of pressing plants. They're like the Walmart of vinyl in a way. They own so many presses that they can charge less than anyone else. It's like the old two pizza shops across from one another where they keep like racing to the bottom. Like, oh, my pizza's $2 a slice. Oh, my pizza's $1.50 a slice. My pizza's $1 a slice. And now everyone's losing money and the entire bottom drops out. Maybe that's what's happening. I don't know. Maybe this is going to drive smaller presses out of business by working with places like GZ Media. It is a tricky situation, and you want to do the right thing by supporting your local press, like PMP, but you also want to keep an eye on your own pocketbook. There's no ethical consumption under capitalism, but just keep those things in mind. Those are the two recommendations I'm making. You can choose for yourself. I've used both very recently. Love PMP, but sometimes precision is the right choice. It's up to you. You decide. Okay. That's all I'm going to say about vinyl for the moment. That was quite a bit about vinyl. If you have more questions, if you have comments, get at me. Okay, CDs. CDs are considered to be returning in popularity, but from conversations that I have had, they just actually never went away. CDs have always been popular. It's just that vinyl took a nosedive for a long time and then climbed this huge big hill back up into being a financial success story. But CDs, they were always just steady. Truthfully, they sound extremely good. Possibly the best format. Many of you may take umbrage with that, saying that vinyl sounds the best, but I will have Supreme Mastering Engineer John Baldwin Jr. come on this podcast and speak at you for 45 minutes uninterrupted about why that may not be technically true. And I think he could do it, actually. It would be a pretty fun test. Unedited John Baldwin talking about the superiority of the compact disc format. So, yes. CDs sound good. They are relatively affordable to make, and they're very easy to haul around to shows or to put in the mail. I think the last time I made CDs, I had about 250 made for $550. That's about $2 per unit, and the end product was a shrink-wrapped CD in a nice digipack. There are cheaper options out there. I tend to use We Make Tapes, as they are based in Nashville. At least they were based in Nashville. I think they got sold to a larger company. I don't know where to get them made now, but We Make Tapes is what I'm suggesting, even though I know that they're owned by someone else. It's a pretty good option, honestly, truly. That's enough for CDs. The last format that I will discuss in this section is cassette tapes. People tend to look down upon them as they have inferior sound quality and are just vaguely impractical. Like, people will have a turntable for vinyl or a CD player, but they may not have a tape deck. I get that. That said, I really love the format. They look great. There are so many options for how you can make it look, and they can be made relatively cheap. The last two cassettes I made for YK were for Trashman and for General Trust. Both were manufactured by Duplication.ca, a Canadian company that has a crapload of options. We made sparkly, clear, green cassettes for Trashman in a mint green shell. They look fantastic. I think we made 40 tapes with all the bells and whistles, plus shipping, and it cost around $230. That's $575 per unit for anyone that's keeping score, plus $5 to $6 for shipping. Tapes can be a hard sell, but I think they are an affordable way to make a physical version of your music. And if you're playing shows or if you're putting stuff online for people to buy, it is an easy and generally affordable way for people to support you. I will say, if you are considering tapes, look in the show notes and get in touch with Second Floor Recording Company. That is a record label / tape duplicator here in Nashville. Billy does great work, and I really want to make tapes with him myself one day, but you might beat me to the punch. Get in touch with Second Floor Recording Company. And while you're at it, get in touch with the Risology Club here in Nashville to print your J-cards. The risograph process is a very unique printing process. It looks so cool. We did it for General Trust's tape. I love it. You really should consider it as well. Get in touch with them. They're great. Both are linked to the show notes. Okay. End of chapter 1. Chapter 2, material preparation. Okay, so the other big thing to consider is singles. I'll talk about this more in a second, but there's two ways to think about this. One, there's lead-up singles to an album, to a bigger piece of work, and then there's also standalone singles that are just sort of one-off songs like they did in the old days. In both situations, an album with singles leading up or a standalone song, I like to consider not only what song to pick, which we'll talk about, but is there additional material that can go along with that track? Is there a B-side that maybe you have access to? Is there a demo? Does the song lend itself to remixes? I mention that because lately I find myself really wanting to release 2 songs at a time with every single, even if it's leading up to an album or if it's a standalone single. Minimum of 2 songs, kind of like an old 45. Does that make sense? I didn't write this part down, kind of going off the cuff. Maybe it's not clear. If you're putting out 1 song, maybe think about putting out 2 or more songs. This isn't always practical, but the reason I mention it is because thinking about this as a listener myself, if a release has 2 songs, like the single and a B-side, the single and a remix, the single and something else, I'm just more intrigued by it. I'm more interested. I understand that's an ideal world situation, not always possible, but it is something for you to consider while planning. So all of that will impact the next biggest step in the process. So think about your singles and demos and remixes and all that as we dive in. We spent all that time thinking about the release formats because the next step in the process is mastering your work. If you're unfamiliar, the mastering process kind of brings a group of recordings into the same sonic space, as well as boosting the overall impact of the song. Google's little AI summary says,
audio mastering is the final step in music production that prepares a song or album for distribution. It involves optimizing the sound quality of a recording so that it sounds consistent across different devices and media formats.
There are a lot of technical concerns around audio equalization, compression, limiting, noise reduction, etc. Technical things that, quite frankly, are lost on me. The mastering process is equal parts highly technical and, for me, incredibly magical, meaning there's an undefinable art to it as much as there is tweaking knobs and pressing buttons. Not every release needs to be mastered. The Prudish Few put out an album in 2020, The Eagle Has Left the Building, and it was not mastered. The mixes sounded great, and the band just didn't want to do anything to alter that. It was the right choice. There are AI apps out there these days that will quote-unquote master your release, and some of them work quite well. Some of them do not. There is no hard and fast rule for any of this. Not all releases need to be mastered. Those releases that do benefit from it don't necessarily have to be mastered by a human. However, different release formats have different limitations that can make them sound the best. You can get your music mastered in a single pass, all inclusively, and put that music out on digital and submit it to your vinyl manufacturing job and get it replicated onto a CD and dub it onto a cassette. That absolutely will work, and it will probably save you a bit of money, but it may not sound optimal, especially for vinyl. This sounds a little wild, but mastering for vinyl ensures that the stylus can actually play the record. I don't want to speak out of turn because honestly, I'm going to sound like an idiot trying to get into the technical who's its and what's its about vinyl records, but it's a needle sitting in a groove. And that physical process means that if your audio is not optimized, it could bump the needle out of the groove. I have received test pressings where that has happened before. Sometimes it just sounds terrible. It needs to be optimized for vinyl if you're going to do vinyl, because there's a lot of things that can go wrong. I'm doing a lot of caveating in this recording. There are albums that you can master once and it will work for all those formats and it will sound phenomenal on vinyl. I'm just saying, for the most part, general rule of thumb, a master for digital and a master for vinyl makes sense. For YK, I've been lucky enough to have people like the aforementioned John Baldwin Jr., Patrick Dampier, Ryan Norris, Brad Boatwright do a lot of the mastering across a lot of the recent YK releases. I am happy to put you in touch with any of them. Okay, so you've got your format selected. Now your audio is going into the process of getting mastered for those specific formats. What you'll want to do next is dive straight into artwork, but try to force yourself to pump the brakes. The next real thing you should take on is thinking about artist photos and bio. Sometimes 2 of the most laborious things to undertake. Why do you need either of those things? For one, band photos might actually help you put together the album artwork that we'll get into next. You're also likely to be putting this music on Bandcamp, Spotify, etc., and they have places for artist imageries and for bios. And, quite frankly, thinking even more positively about your release, you are going to pitch yourself to some press and to some radio and some outlets, and they will benefit from having a photo and from having a little insight about your music. Neither of these are scary, I promise. For artist photos, I tend to employ the help of a more professional photographer. That said, we all have phones in our pockets these days, and there's no reason not to embrace that. Sit in your favorite chair and have someone take your photo. Great, that will work. But I would also recommend maybe put a little creative thought into your process. Is your music dark? Should the photos reflect that? Is the music somber? Should the photos be the opposite of that? Does you, the artist, do they play live? Do they have great photos of that experience? Maybe that's all you need. I truly don't think there's hard and fast rules about what your artist photo should look like. It can even be somewhat abstract. For example, for the 2020 Meadow Noise album, Threve, Matt Glassmeyer gave me photos of himself wearing an absolutely terrifying mask, lying in a river, pinned under a rock. It was honestly disturbing. I'm still thinking about it. He also sent photos of some people in elaborate bird costumes walking in the same river. Phenomenal. Neither of those are of him at all. I mean, he was the body lying in the river, but it was a mask over his face. It was just very abstract, just a striking image of some sort. Lastly, he sent me a photo of himself hanging out with one of his daughters. Pleasant, delightful. That's all to say, only one of those photos was actually of Matt in any recognizable way, and that's okay. People may tell you to avoid cliches, like standing against a brick wall, or standing out in a field, or standing inside of a derelict building. I disagree. I have examples of almost all of those types of images, and I enjoy them all. Do what feels comfortable to you, because there's nothing worse than a band photo where the artist looks miserable. If you need photographer recommendations here in Nashville, I'm happy to make them. Miles Price, I got your number. HN James, I got your number. Okay, band bios are tough, but here's what I like to do. Remember that a band bio is an introduction to an artist, a project, or an album. It's a way to talk about this thing that the artist has been working on for some time and talk about why it's interesting. Is this a single written about a dream that a band member had where Nashville flooded? Or a song about how you feel the most creative after the sun goes down? Is it a pop song written as a direct reply to Spotify CEO Daniel Ek when he said, if you're failing at Spotify, you just need to write more songs? Those are all interesting inspirations for a song or album, and also all legitimate, true examples of some YK releases. If you don't want to write about what a song is about, which frankly, I understand, I have no idea what any song The Robe has written is about. And that's by design. He does not tell me what they're about. I don't ask what they're about. He leaves it completely up to the listener to interpret. Total respect. Sometimes you want to afford the listener their interpretation room for themselves. So if you don't want to write about what a song is about, you can write about the artist themselves, how they recorded it, what it sounds like. There's something interesting in there, I promise. Writing a band bio can be tough, so you might want to consider hiring someone. There are tons of great journalists in every town that probably need some freelance work and can help you write a hell of a bio. Or there are marketing people that will do this on the side. Olivia Ladd here in Nashville does a bang-up job on a band bio. Go hire her. If you don't want to hire someone, try this exercise. Write out 5 legitimate things you want to know, or maybe like their leading questions and you already kind of know the answer to them, but it will spur the artist to talk about them. For example,
I heard this album started as 2 EPs and then came together as one concept record. Can you speak more to that? The cover of your record has you jumping a dirt bike through a ring of fire, a trial, if you will. Did you actually do that? Stylistically, this album is much dancier than your previous. What inspired that direction?
Get those questions answered and use that as a basis for your bio. This might sound controversial, but I really suggest logging into your favorite AI platform. Claude by Anthropic is my current favorite, and ask it to write a band bio based on the questions and answers that you send over. I am not suggesting that you copy and paste whatever the AI spits back at you, but I find that working from something is a lot easier than working from nothing. So don't come at me for this one. I know AI has lots of problems, which we can talk about on a future episode, but it's a massively helpful tool, especially in this context. And when you're writing a band bio, you're going to need 2 versions. One is the full-length bio. 5 paragraphs, 10 paragraphs, whatever you want to sell your story. You're also going to need a single paragraph about the record. That's called the nut graph. Seriously, that's a real journalism term, and while people will give you quizzical looks about it, it is truly, honestly, a thing. There's a link in the show notes. The nut graph is like the kernel of what you're trying to get across. I think traditionally this is like the second paragraph of a proper article after the lead, but again, journalists, don't come for me. The nut graph is a 1-paragraph summary about your release. The heavy hitter that would take a music journalist very little time to read and pique their interest. This is where you might name drop other projects that an artist has been involved with, or remind who a record was recorded with, anything that might stand out. If you don't have any of that, you can write something intriguing about what the song is about. If you don't have anything to say about what the song is about, you can say they are up and coming, or they're a veteran of the scene, or they're loud and brash, or they're introspective yet egomaniacal. Anything will work. It's just a way to grab some attention that isn't 10 paragraphs. Because unless the person is already an interested party, they're not going to read 10 paragraphs to get the point. Attention is a rare commodity, so you need to get in there and explain what the release is rather quickly.
Pause.
Okay, now, you've got band photos. You've got a band bio. You've got the audio and the mastering process. And because you know your release formats, you know what size artwork you will need. Digital is a 3000 by 3000 single image. Vinyl may be a simple jacket or a big involved gatefold. CDs and cassettes have their own needs as well. Before you dive in headfirst to making some art, please take a moment to compile all of your credits. What's the track listing? What's the A-side, B-side breakdown for the vinyl? Who should be credited? Written by, performed by, mixed by, mastered by, trumpets on track 3 by whom? What is the label catalog number? Is there a publishing company associated with these songs? Does the artist have a website? Do you have lyrics that you want to consider including? Get them. Any bit of text you want to include in the artwork, put it in a document first. It will save you sanity down the line. Promise. For many YK artists, they come with a vision for the artwork right from the onset. Sometimes they may allow me to weigh in on some ideas, or we may outsource it entirely. I really love working with other designers for YK projects, but admittedly, selfishly, I also love doing a lot of it myself. If you have no idea what you're doing with graphic design, I do not suggest turning to AI to get the final results that you want, but I do suggest using AI to spitball ideas and get some inspiration, or maybe even using AI to generate pieces of a larger result. But at this time in 2025, right now, a lot of AI art is garbage. Some of it is not. I'm not painting with a wide brush here. As you can tell from previous parts of this episode, there's lots of caveating here. There's no one golden rule. Some AI art is great. I have used AI in several art pieces that I have put out. It can be good, but a lot of it is garbage. Just saying, think of it kind of like the band bio. Use it as a jumping off point rather than the final result. Or not. It's just my opinion. Do whatever you would like. I don't really have too many rules about artwork. Of all of the YK releases, approximately 143 at this time, I think there is one that I flat out do not like. And I made it. Everything else I have some level of affection for, even if they are all over the board in terms of style. If you need some inspiration, maybe you can consider using the same style or layout format for all of your releases. I put out a number of DM Stith releases, and he did the artwork for each and kind of made them these thematic sets, doing variations on a theme. Labels like long-form editions do something similar with a large body of releases riffing on a theme. That is linked in the show notes. You got to check out that artwork. If you find yourself needing some true inspiration, my advice is to get off the internet and go to your local used record store. Find the dustiest bin and start flipping through them. It doesn't matter if you're pressing vinyl or not. There's just no better possibility of inspiration than flipping through old records. The typography, the photography, the layouts, the color schemes. There's a million possibilities that may grab you. Much like AI, you aren't looking to take something directly from this experience, but I promise you will see something that inspires you. If you're unable to leave the house, just Google weirdest vinyl record and start bopping around. Otherwise, get yourself to the record store. Phonolux or Great Escape here in Nashville are my favorite spots for this, but there is no bad option. Once you have an idea you like, show it around. Get some feedback. Critiques can be hard, but you want your album cover to represent you in a memorable way. Also, a lot of people will tell you to shrink your artwork way down and see how it looks on Spotify and other services, like a 200 by 200 pixel thumbnail. I disagree. Make your art however you want it to be. Do not try to optimize for some streaming platform. If you're going to optimize for anything, optimize it for authenticity. Make it something you really like. Truly, do that. Make it something you really like. Okay, we're making some real progress here. Chapter 3.
Bring me my calendar.
Now that the artwork is taking shape, I start to think about our release plan. How do we want to roll this out into the world? Through all of the previous steps, I am likely to have been listening to the unmastered version obsessively, just enjoying the music on repeat. From that, much inspiration comes. If we're dealing with an album, it's pretty traditional to think about releasing a song or two as preview singles before unleashing the whole album. This helps build some anticipation for the release and frankly may serve as a practical way to pack in some extra time before your physical version is ready, if you choose to make a physical version. I don't claim to have any sort of magical insight into how one chooses preview singles from an album. I think of it way more art than science, but I have been told over the years if you're going to do 3 singles, make the one you think is the strongest be the second one. Don't lead with it. I'm sure there's some ancient music industry advice behind that, but I'm not privy to it. I will also add to this that I'm talking about releasing an album with preview singles, which is a very traditional way of doing things, but with the streaming platforms and with the internet, there is a lot of flexibility to this. We released a New Man EP where we released one new song every couple weeks, and we just rolled it out that way. I've seen other bands do the same for full-length albums. You can do a lot. There's a thing called waterfalling, where you just basically release one song, and then the next single that you release, the second one, includes the first one, and the third one includes the first 2, and you just keep going, basically building out little EPs in an out-of-sequence kind of release schedule. It's an interesting way. There's a lot to do here. This episode cannot cover everything, but I'll guide you through the traditional route, but let yourself be open to other alternatives. Okay, so on that traditional note, here's what I do. As I have been obsessively listening to the record, I think about which songs immediately popped out to me. Of the batch, were there any that drilled into my head more than others? Is this album stylistically different than previous work? If so, how do we represent that with a single? With the last Talking with Hands record, I could have picked pretty much any of the songs, but both Matt and I felt like number 1 record was the most immediately appealing bop, so it was a single. However, we released it first, not second. I don't know that I really buy into the mysterious ancient music industry advice I mentioned previously, but it is there. My thinking is that in an internet world, attention spans are short, so you've got a small window to grab someone. For me, number 1 record was that. Along with picking a single, you may also want to think about some remixes to go along with it. If you're as old as I am, you may recall the maxi single format, which I remember very fondly from Circuit City and Tower Records. It would be a single, 2 remixes, and a B-side. It is, honestly, perfect. I wish we saw it more often. YK has done it with Talking with Hands, Sugar Skulls, Uncle Skeleton, and others, but I wish we did it all the time. Don't get me wrong, I understand it is work to get remixes and then get those singles mastered and then make artwork for those releases, but I think it's a worthwhile endeavor. It's worth the work. Anyway, that sounds like a digression from the plan here, but if you want to do the maxi single, you should buffer in some more time for yourself to get the stems together from the artist, pick some remixers, figure out what kind of budget's involved with that, and then give timelines to people when those are due. Like I said at the top, it can become a lot of plate spinning. Okay, Let's say you have now picked some singles, no maxi single business for the purposes of this conversation, and you start to map those out into a calendar of events. If you have a specific release date for the album, you're going to want to work backwards from there. Remember, if you picked vinyl as one of your formats and you want everything to drop on the same day, you got to give yourself at least 3 months for production of that record. And you really should give yourself 3.5, 4 months from the time you submitted all the pieces. I know that's painful to think about, but it's more painful to release an LP without the actual LP in your hands. It has happened to me more times than I like to admit. Give yourself a buffer. Originally, I was going to say 2 months for production, maybe 3 months as a safety, but I don't know. Just being cautious and pessimistic, let's say it's 3 months of production. You got to get test pressings. You got to approve those test pressings. Hopefully they're good, which, if you had it mastered for vinyl, they will be. But it's tricky. It's a plate spinning balancing act, so give yourself the buffer. In terms of digital, influencers and online gurus are going to tell you to give yourself 6 weeks between each single, as that is the amount of time Spotify has requested to consider a song that you pitch them. That's an understandable bit of advice to follow, but man, that's a long window of time between songs. Personally, I do not put a ton of stock into pitching songs to Spotify. I do it. Just like everyone else, I do it because I'm not a full-blown pessimist. I think there's always a chance someone at that megacorp will hear how good the music is and put it on some playlist and feature it and boost my artist into the stratosphere, which would be fantastic and also possible. But I also inversely acknowledge that there is a massive sea of competition. And also, Spotify is problematic, so overall, it's a tough situation. Okay. So now you're working backwards from the album release date, and let's say you give yourself 3 weeks between singles. That means that your second single will be 6 weeks before the album release, and you can pitch it to Spotify in plenty of time ahead of that. I prefer to have individual artwork for each of the singles that kind of thematically tie into the album, but that's up to you. You can certainly use the album art. Okay. Our list of to-dos is getting a little shorter now. We have a release format. We have a few band photos. We have a band bio. We have a nut graph. We have artwork. We know what singles we want to go with. And our audio may even be back from our mastering engineer by now. And we have a schedule. I think it's safe to say at this point, we're going from planning to doing.
Chapter 4, Planning for Departure.
Okay, at this point, to reiterate, we have gathered all of our essential raw materials and can start laying the groundwork for the record. With your mastered audio and your artwork, you can submit the vinyl manufacturing job. It'll probably take 3 to 4 weeks for the test pressing to come back to you, and then another 6 weeks after that for the vinyl production. If you're extremely lucky. 3 to 4 weeks for the test pressing is pretty average. 6 weeks for the vinyl production is in an ideal world. It's probably going to be 2 months. It might be 2.5 months, depending on how busy that pressing plant is. One big element that we have not touched on here yet is music videos. This really should not be a footnote in the world of thinking about your release, but it's also not something that should be tackled before you know what singles you're going to release, what your artwork is, what your vibe for this whole thing is. I'm going to be totally honest, videos are hard. They can be very costly, or they can be very cheap. They can be boring as hell, or they can be absolutely riveting. Pretty much anywhere you would be able to post a video is going to have a big old metric for number of plays right beside it, and sometimes that can be really hard to see. I have paid for videos that are fantastic, and then they have less than 100 views for a long time. The brutality of metrics aside, we live in a very visual world these days, so you need to have a video element to go along with your release. At bare minimum, consider making quote-unquote official audio videos for YouTube and Instagram. This can be a still image with your audio behind it. Not a lot, but it's something. You could also make a lyric video. This is becoming much easier these days with tools that are not quite as hard to learn as Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere. I've actually noticed a trend lately that's kind of a blend between a lyric video and a music video that just sort of loops. There's a Soccer Mommy video for Driver that came out in 2024 that's definitely a music video, but it's essentially just video of Sophia Allison riding around in a car having a nice time with the lyrics underneath. They're calling it a lyric video. Kind of looks like an official video. Interesting hybrid. Even simpler, Tower Defense made a video for the song Glyphs from their Stay Inside EP, and it's simply slow motion footage that Mike shot while driving around with lyrics overlaid on top. It's so simple and so effective. Click through in the show notes if you want to see it. So a couple little extra creative gems in there, but it's a really smart way of doing this kind of video content in a simple way. Videos come in all shapes and sizes, and I think you should consider doing at least one because it's fun. Try not to spend a ton of money on it because it's honestly, truthfully, kind of a fairly horrible monetary investment, but it is a lot of fun. To reduce the monetary investment side of things, I did make a video with Eve Murray for her song Miracle that looks like a moving magic eye video. Remember those magic eye things that they used to print in the newspaper that looks like a paisley pattern, and if you stare at it, you can see a dolphin? We made that in video form. From a video monetary budgetary standpoint, it was very simple. Eve did 3 takes with her video camera in her house from her laptop, and then I did a bunch of weird experimentation in post. I learned so much, and I loved how it turned out. Making a video can be fun, but also it's a promotional tool. People are constantly on their phones, and if you can give them something to look at, you're more likely to give them pause for a moment and listen to your music. You don't have to and probably shouldn't approach it like a commercial endeavor, though I will say bands like Twin have done a fantastic job of shooting their videos framed in such a way that they fit perfectly vertically. So they have maximum impact on Instagram and TikTok. You don't have to do that, but it is admirable in its own way. Think of it sort of like a commercial vessel, but also just like a way for people to find your music and another extension of the artistic expression. That's all just to say, yes, make videos. If you need recommendations on directors, reach out. I can help you find them. Casey Pierce is fantastic. Ivy Eat Home does captivating work. Jeremy Fry of Tower Defense does magic. People are out there at all different budget levels ready to help. Or just do it yourself. You may learn and have a great time. But also collaborate if you can. It's fun to collaborate. Okay, now while you're swimming with video ideas, you can take some time to get your record prepped for release. Go log into your digital distributor and upload all of your mastered audio and schedule your singles on the schedule that you have already outlined. Do the same for Bandcamp, Ampwall, and if you have a store like Shopify, prep that too. I seriously advise having a website. We will talk more in depth about running your own store in another episode, but at the very least, you really need a website. I know that sounds archaic in 2025, but this serves so many purposes. You can gather people's emails, you can post easily to find links about buying your merch, you can let people hear your record, see you, read about you, all the things. Others may debate this, but I really do believe it is crucial. Another thing a website can do is host a preview page for press people. Now that you've got all these machinations in the work, you may want to try having some local press write about it, or a local radio station consider it for rotation. Your website can host a hidden page that houses your bio, your photos, your album stream, etc. before the album is ever announced to the general public. You can also use a service like Disco to accomplish that specific goal as well. You've got options. So yeah, set up a press page. Include the bio, the photos, the album stream, and then those videos when you're done with them. Maybe put a private SoundCloud embed. Maybe an exclusive Bandcamp embed. Again, you have options, things that are affordable. While you're at it, if you have any previous press quotes, throw those on there. Put the album credits up there. Toss that nut graph up at the top. This is the modern day equivalent of what used to be called a one sheet. You'll send this around to grab people's attention and give them the opportunity to dive in more. What I advise you not to do is send someone a Dropbox or Google Drive link to your album. This is a pretty popular tactic because it's pretty easy to do, but I strongly advise against it. Look, I've been pretty lenient so far on my list of no-nos here and lots of caveats, but I think I'm going to dig my heels in on this one. The folder of audio is a crappy experience. Is someone supposed to download a folder of WAV files and then put that in their iTunes to preview your record? Are they supposed to individually click on each song and play it in a very broken up experience? Are they supposed to open your PDF press release in a new tab while they navigate that track listing of unordered files? It's a crappy process. I'm sure there are exceptions, but just don't do it. Please don't do this. Now that you have a proper press page, not a Google Drive or Dropbox link, you start the process of contacting people that may want to cover your music. In 2025, this is harder than ever. Music discovery has been largely relegated to being included in a playlist. This is nice, but having someone write something about your music is a really wonderful feeling. So let's try to make that happen. Since I am Nashville-based, I reach out to everyone I know in the Nashville area that might be interested. All the local radio stations, WNXP, WRLT, WMTS, WBUZ, Acme. And if they don't have a way to submit music directly to the station, like WXNA, I find a DJ that I like and I email them a download code and the nut graph about the release. I contact the Nashville scene, the Nashvillian, and when my singles are ready, I contact No Country for New Nashville. I do all of this via email. I know there are Instagram DM tactics and TikTok friends, whatever. There's lots of ways to reach influencers and such, but start with email. It is more powerful than you think. And while you are submitting to radio stations, and you 1000% should be, make sure you send along a link to a WAV file, not an MP3. You can link to a Dropbox or a Google Drive in this case for one specific file, just not your whole press page. And make sure you send a censored version. I know we're all adults here and cursing is no big deal, but the radio and the FCC have different opinions. There's an episode of the podcast Devalued that is an interview with two WNXP DJs, Jason Moon Wilkins and Emily Young, where they talk very explicitly about this topic. It is a great episode. It is linked in the show notes. Go listen to it after this. If you don't live in Nashville, you'll have your own set of local papers and publications and radio stations to contact. There's also nationally recognized outlets like KEXP or WFMU that you should always reach out to. There's music blogs like Stereo Gum and Aquarium Drunkard and Pitchfork, yes, even Pitchfork, and loads of others. You may not have a shot in hell with getting coverage from like Stereo Gum, but we're just sending emails here. It's worth trying. Think about what it would be like to receive 1,000 emails a day pitching you on a band. I'm sure all the music editors at all of these places receive a massive volume of email. What would make something like this stand out? A catchy subject line? Maybe an emoji? Maybe a name they recognize? Think about what might grab someone's attention and try it out. Another outlet you should consider trying is a service like submithub.com. This is a service where you buy credits and then you spend those credits to get blogs and influencers to consider your music. Does that sound like payola? Yes, it kind of does. Is it maybe worth it to spend $30 or $50 or $100 to just blast your music to a bunch of people that may love it and write it up? Yeah, it might be worth it. There are lots of services like SubmitHub, but none have really come remotely close in terms of affordability in my experience. There are publicists that can be hired, generally costing thousands of dollars, that will do a similar service. I have lots of thoughts on paying for PR, but I think if you're on the independent level that I am on, you may want to spend that money on something like SubmitHub. We can talk more about that later. No shade to publicists, but at this level, maybe consider these kinds of services. Here's the thing. People will write you back. Radio stations will play your music. Through this process, you might find someone that's willing to premiere a song or showcase the video once it's out. None of this is guaranteed, but it's way more possible than you think, I promise. So, as your first single looms on the horizon, I suggest putting a mailing list sign up on your website. Go over to MailChimp or Marigold or Beehive, or if you're on WordPress or Squarespace for your website, use their email capture option. The service doesn't matter. Or just drive people to your Bandcamp account with the instruction of click the follow button. As your first single looms on the horizon, drive people to that mailing list option. The reason you want to do this is because your mailing list is not subject to the whims of the algorithm. When the time comes for you to officially release that single, you are inevitably going to post about it on your Instagram or your Threads or your Blue Sky or your Mastodon or your TikTok or your Reddit or whatever service you like. Don't post it on X. Get off of X. Log out. Pause the podcast right now. Log out of X. Go private. Forget it forever. Whenever you post to those services, you are now swimming in the pool of millions of others and subject to visibility that's based on whatever the algorithm decides people should see. For instance, did you know on Threads, if you include a link in your post, that Threads will now show it to fewer people? From their perspective, they don't want people to click off and away from their service. So outbound links should be seen less. From your perspective, a link to the song on streaming services or on Bandcamp would be great. Yes, you could post a video on Threads so people could hear it there. And yes, you probably should do that. But eventually, you're going to want people to go to your Ampwall page or go to your Bandcamp page to buy that vinyl. Nobody's going to see it if you post a link on Threads because they are going to show it to fewer people. That's the power of their algorithm because they want people to stay on their service. That happens on literally every platform. This is a little mini rant, but it's all just to say having an email list seems antiquated and boring, but it is a surefire way to tell people about your release. If having a proper email list seems too hard, services like Bandcamp and Ampwall have tools built right in to make it easy to post updates. And those updates get sent via email to all of your followers. I know I sound like someone that grew up working in the music industry in the late 90s, carrying around a clipboard at shows, asking people to write down their email address and then transcribe those email addresses into a FileMaker Pro database, but I absolutely did all of that, and I truly think it was effective. Okay, so you've been building your mailing list. Check. You've been emailing radio stations. You've been emailing alt weeklies. You've been participating in payola for blogs. You've got your lyric video ready to go. Your single has been pitched to Spotify weeks ago, and today is the day. It's time to unleash it on the world.
Chapter 5. Unleashing the Goods.
Congratulations! It's release day. Your music and video are out in the world. I suggest you post about the song sometime in the morning, early if you're able. People who commute or have a slow start at work will see it. I suggest you post about the video sometime in the afternoon, maybe 3 p.m. As the workday slugs on, people tend to hit up their social media. Now, you should put all that stuff out in the world as soon as you are able, or automatically post it at midnight or whatever, but post about it on social media in that cadence. I've found that it works. Make sure you send an email blast early and include a link to your pre-order or your order for your record, CD, cassette, or download. Put it all on the social medias. Put it on your grid. Yeah, it's grid worthy. Put it on your website, that website that we forced upon you. And rejoice a little bit. If you have bandmates, send them a happy release day text. Put this stuff all over your stories. Repost anyone that posts about you. If it's dead silent, that's okay too. Just enjoy it for yourself. The music is out in the world, and that's a huge accomplishment. Then, once you've come down from your self-inflicted high, start preparing to rinse and repeat for the second single. Be persistent, but not annoying. I'm sure there are people younger than myself that would disagree with that advice, but I'm kind of immediately turned off when I start getting DMs that are obviously just mass pitch messages. Ugh. Don't spam, as you run the risk of turning away people who may actually like you. Contact those radio stations again and tell them, hey, the single is out and the next one is coming up on X date. Here's a link. Go to submithub.com, pitch some blogs and playlists on your new content. Spend $20 just to see what sticks. Here's a fun game that I like to play there. Submit your music and choose the option that says, I prefer feedback. This means that any blog that wants to get paid must write a sentence about your music, even if it isn't flattering. However, you can take those reviews and make them positive with some clever editing. I mean, you should be transparent about it, but a well-placed ellipses can go a long way. Imagine someone writes you back for a review and says,
I love the production and keyboard flourishes, but I wasn't really feeling the lyrics or the guitar work.
Just turn that into
Love the production and keyboard flourishes. ...
As long as you tell people that you're doing the editing, it's a fun game. All right, single number 2 will hit the internet and you'll do the same promotion. Radio, blogs, mailing list, video. Hit up your Instagram stories, TikTok, etc. Make sure your work is available on Bandcamp and similar services. They are not automated by your distribution partner, and you really got to set a reminder for yourself to release there. I cannot tell you how annoying it is when I see a big announcement come out for an artist that I really genuinely like, and then I go to their Bandcamp and nothing is available there. I'm trying to pay for music and can't because they just kind of forgot to post it to their Bandcamp or Ampwall or similar service. Literally set a reminder in your calendar or in your reminders app. By the time single 3 comes around, you will be the master of this process. By the time the album hits, hopefully you'll be inspired with even more ideas and more ways to keep talking about the record. Keep driving people to your website and getting them to sign that mailing list. Keep sending email blasts every time you have something to talk about. Maybe even let people hear your single early with a private SoundCloud link. The album will release and you'll have scheduled things so cleanly that listeners will receive their vinyl early. Fans will be sharing their LP on Instagram and loving what you did with the artwork. You can thank everyone that was involved. Remember to celebrate the joy of these releases and let yourself soak in the good feeling. Don't look at the metrics. Don't worry about the fact that Spotify didn't put you on the best new indie rock playlist, even though you pitched them 6 weeks ahead of time and your song is literally fantastic and your nut graph was undeniable. So much of this is luck and determination. Let yourself sigh a little sigh of relief. Maybe it's been years that you've been working on this album. You worked for a long time to get this out there and you should be happy about it. And now, the hardest part of the release cycle.
Chapter 6, The Post-Release Blues.
One of the hardest parts about releasing anything, even a single song, is that pretty much the entire internet is only concerned with things that are new. You can pitch Spotify on songs that are part of your upcoming album, but they do not have a mechanism for pitching them on songs that came out 6 years ago. It makes sense. They got to draw the line somewhere. You can pitch blogs on songs that have been released, but they're more likely to cover something before it's out rather than too far after it's out. That's not always the case, but often it is. To me, this part of the release process is often the hardest part because you want to keep building awareness of your album, but it's a harder story to tell than if it was about to be released. Here are a few ideas that I suggest for alleviating the post-release blues. Hold back one of your videos until the album is out. That's a great way to let people hear a new song, see something cool, and dive into your record when they like it. Put together an influences playlist, the songs that you listened to and were inspired by along the way. Share that playlist with your mailing list and social networks. Bonus points if you keep the playlist under 80 minutes. Bonus points if you post the playlist on multiple platforms, not just Spotify, but Spotify and YouTube, or Spotify and YouTube and Apple Music. Make it accessible everywhere. Reach out to your local college radio station or independent radio station and see if they want to play your record and have you be a guest DJ to talk about some of the influences. If that sounds ridiculous or ludicrous, you aren't listening to enough independent radio. It happens all the time. Find podcasts you like and let them know about the album. Send them your nut graph and let them know you're available to be a guest if they enjoyed the record. That sort of thing might feel kind of pushy and it can be tough to ask for, but sometimes it can't hurt, particularly if you know the podcast and like it. If you're open to it, do a song-by-song breakdown on your Instagram or elsewhere about what a song is about or how you recorded it or why it's meaningful to you. Telephone did this with their self-titled record, and I learned so much. I've been listening to the record for months before it was out, but when they released their song-by-song breakdown, I was like, oh, what an incredibly nice bit of insight to have about each of these songs. That's just a few ideas. There's plenty more. And lastly, I said this before, but this is very important. Let yourself be excited about the release. Don't sign up for those stupid emails from Spotify and Apple Music that show you how many plays you had in the last week. Your music is not the metrics. You worked hard on this and you deserve to give yourself the room to be happy with it.
Chapter 7, The Scrambling to include everything else that I forgot portion.
Okay, so what have I forgotten? You might want to have a record release show. I'm not going to get into that here, but it is fun to do, so you should look into that. You might want to have a Bandcamp listening party. Personally, I have yet to throw one or attend one, but I think they are a great idea. If you made physical copies, you're going to want to take that to your local record store and ask them to put it on consignment. They will do it happily. Make friends with your local record store. You may even want to pitch the record to a retail distributor. This really is not a hard process, especially since you did all that work to get all of your materials together, but it can be tricky if you have no plans to tour. Regardless, if this is something you want to hear more about, let me know. Happy to share the information. That really goes for all of this. I just talked my ever-loving ass off for a very long time, and I'm sure I missed some big gaps along the way. What did I miss? What more should I talk about? Actually, now that I think about it, my brain is firing a million miles a minute thinking of additional things that I left out, but this podcast can only be so long. Maybe I'll do a follow-up. Maybe I'll do a corrections episode. Maybe I'll have someone on to tell me all the things I did wrong, all the things I did right. If that's you, get in touch. Just anybody, everybody, reach out. Tell me, what did I miss? What else should I be doing? Was any of this helpful? Please click through in the show notes and check out the release planner, the blank document that I use to plan things that you can use to plan things. Just get in touch. Hit me up at records_YK on Instagram or email me, michael@ykworld.show. I would love to hear from you. It's all in the show notes. I don't know why I say these things out loud. You don't need to hear them to know what they are. Anyway, the music that you heard throughout this episode is by Mac Burris. He was very kind. I asked him for some interstitial breaking up this wall of talking, and he obliged with lots of great music. Thank you so much, Mac. He's linked in the show notes too. Hire him to make you some music. He's very good at it. Next episode won't just be a wall of me talking. That's a promise. But for now, thank you so much for listening. Really appreciate it. I will talk at you soon. Bye!